So now it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Caitlin Moline. And Caitlin graduated with a BA in Ancient Civilizations and Art History from Rutgers University with minors in History and Media Studies. She teaches Latin, AP, Art History, and World History at West Essex High School in New Jersey. And the title of her presentation today is Romance and Horror in Ovid's Orpheus and Eurydice and Hellraiser. Take it away, Caitlin.
Thank you. So let me share my screen. So good afternoon, everybody. So I want to start by saying that I'm not usually a fan of romance or love stories, but Hellraiser has proven to be the exception. So what scenarios do these words bring to mind? If you said that it's the way I feel around incredibly attractive people, you'd be correct. But if you said that they're also common emotional and physical reactions to the horrific, you would also be correct. These words and phrases are a larger part of a larger list from Noel Carroll's Philosophy of Horror. As a genre, Carroll defines horror in formulaic terms. It is a genre that contains not only fear, but also disgust. As we all probably know, fear and pity defines tragedy. Right? So fear is a common element in both of these genres. And I think that these formulas explain why tragedy is more commonly a subgenre of romance than horror, because disgust and love seem at odds with each other. But pity and love, on the other hand. And speaking of love and romance, right? What is romance as a genre? According to the Romance Writers of America, which is an organization that I just learned about recently, there are two basic elements that comprise every romance novel: a central love story and an emotionally satisfying and optimistic ending. A central love story, the plot centers around individuals falling in love and struggling to make the relationship work. And a writer can focus or include as many subplots as he or she wants, as long as the love story is the main focus of the novel. An emotionally satisfying and optimistic ending. In a romance, the lovers who risk and struggle for each other and their relationship are rewarded with emotional justice and unconditional love. There are many cross-genres and subgenres of romance. The most popular are romantic comedy and tragic romance, but there's also romantic horror, which is the focus of this presentation. Romance is about separation and longing, i.e. desire and attraction. Horror is also about separation and longing, but also disgust. Usually there's a monster or a predator who seeks out victims and seeks to connect to them on some level. In the case of romance horror, if we have vampires or werewolves as our antagonists, there's a desire to turn the victim into a monster as well. But do vampires and werewolves elicit disgust, right? Because disgust is a key element to horror. I don't know. You'll have to judge for yourself. Ghost stories are also about desire, literally in the sense that someone is absent and or their physical body is missing. But again, do ghosts elicit disgust? I don't know. These are just two examples. But typically movies that we would call romantic horror tend to downplay the disgust element to the point where they become really more like tragic romances featuring attractive monsters or supernatural beings. The film Hellraiser does not downplay these disgusting elements. And at this point, I want to compare the imagery and narrative structures of two stories which share similar themes, Clive Barker's Hellraiser and Ovid's Orpheus and Eurydice. Both are horror and romance, and I think that the crossing of these genres strengthens the love story in each. And synopses are as follows. In Hellraiser, sexual deviant Frank inadvertently opens a portal to hell when he tinkers with a box that he bought while abroad. The act unleashes gruesome beings called Cenobites who tear Frank's body apart. When Frank's brother and his wife Julia move into Frank's old house, they accidentally bring what is left of Frank back to life. Frank then convinces Julia, his one-time lover, to lure men back to the house so that he can use their blood to reconstruct himself. See? It's a love story. In Orpheus and Eurydice, as Eurydice is walking through the grass, a viper bites her foot, killing her. Orpheus travels to the underworld to ask Persephone and Hades to give back his wife. Persephone and Hades agree to grant his request on the condition that he does not look back at his wife as they leave the underworld. Orpheus starts his ascent, but worried about Eurydice, looks back at her. This time, she is lost for good. Orpheus grieves and begins to sing. He renounces relationships with women and is later viciously torn apart by Maenads. The rest of Book 10 of Ovid's Metamorphosis is perhaps even more horrific. We have stories of horrific death and or metamorphosis, which is a punishment that Venus calls in between exile and death. And these are often the result of deviant sexual desire. Among other things, a youth's face is crushed by an errant discus, prostitutes are turned into granite, and a young woman is turned into a tree after sexing her father for several nights. Despite the fact that she's sort of on the fence about it, a man falls in love with a statue, a man beats a woman at a foot race by cheating, and then Venus turns both of them into lions because she doesn't get enough attention. And finally, a very handsome man is gouged by a boar. And I actually think that Pygmalion's story is kind of the least horrific of all of these, just because it's so commonplace. Right? Men are constantly falling in love with inanimate objects, as you can see here. For this slide, I'm sorry that you have to see this, but this is important. Hellraiser's imagery is horrific and gross, and in the first few minutes, we witness Frank's dismemberment. Frank tinkers with a puzzle box that is supposed to be a portal into some kind of S&M paradise, and we see the result of that here. It brings to mind the Dionysian ritual of Sparagmos. Ovid's Orpheus and Eurydice ends with a Sparagmos, when Orpheus is torn apart by Maenads after unsuccessfully resurrecting his wife. It's horrifying, and in both cases, it is also symbolic of sexual or romantic desire not coming to fruition. The horrific imagery continues with what is, in my opinion, a real tour de force of cross-cut editing. Early on in the film, Julia, who's married to Frank's brother, Larry, is reminiscing about her first sexual encounter with Frank. As she recalls this, Larry is downstairs, helping to move a mattress. The camera cuts between the memory of this affair and the moving of the mattress. The shots get tighter and tighter, and the cutting back and forth also becomes more frequent. The camera moving in on the rusty nail that is jutting out from the wall, and Julia's ringed hand gripping the wedding dress, which she will soon be wearing in her marriage to Larry. It all culminates in, this money shot of the nail ripping through Larry's hand. And then we immediately cut to this post-coital scene of Frank and Julia in bed. The editing in particular is what makes the connection between horror and sex patently clear. I cropped part of this image because of the nudity and because I would like my parents to watch this talk maybe. But I did also just use the phrase money shot. They're probably not going to like that. I was going to show a clip of this also, but the quality is kind of poor. And also I think like you have to sign into YouTube in order to view it because it's mature content, and apparently YouTube has standards for that kind of thing. So I'm gonna post it into the chat, I think at the end of my presentation, if you'd like to view it at a later point in time. But I also think that the cropped image here kind of shows you, it draws attention to this thing over here, this sculpture of this good luck sign. And I think that's intentional as kind of like a sarcastic omen for both of these characters, right? Because they've just engaged in adultery. And as we will see, they will both be doomed and their fates will become sealed together upon Frank's eventual resurrection. Speaking of bad omens or bad puns, maybe, bad omens abound as well in Orpheus and Eurydice. Right from the start, there is a sign of foreboding. The marriage torch won't ignite, and Eurydice's death is said to be worse than originally augured. She falls down dead within the first 10 lines, and Orpheus is in the underworld by line 13. It is described as an inamoina regna. Orpheus enters with pulsis nervis, that is the plucked strings of his lyre. Nervis can also mean the literal sinews of the body, perhaps as Orpheus nervously enters Hades. The idea of sinews being plucked, to me at least, is incredibly disgusting. So I'd like to think that double meaning is purposeful. As he descends into the Opaca Tartara, which is also described as a place full of fear, he encounters fearsome monsters in residence, particularly Cerberus. And the descriptions here aren't at all unusual and shouldn't be considered groundbreaking for the horror genre. But the fact that we think of Orpheus and Eurydice as a love story more than anything else, I think makes this kind of surprising. Orpheus's catabasis is considered to be a bold romantic move, and his decision to look back at his wife despite Hades' stipulation is read as either a sign of uxorious devotion or impulsive desire. Either way, love, particularly tragic love, is the ultimate idea. And we see this sentiment presented in various media representations. And while these are fair interpretations, they tend to neglect the horrific aspects of the story that are lurking in plain sight. They focus more on the mystical and or tragic elements. But the bad omens continue even after Orpheus has softened the resolve of Hades' residence. Eurydice stumbles behind Orpheus with an injured ankle, even after death. First, she dies an incredibly stupid death. It's not like the snake attacks her. She steps on the snake. And then she finally has this opportunity to leave, and she can't even run out of there because she has a wounded ankle, and she's, slowly walking behind Orpheus. Sort of reminds me of this horror trope, Too Dumb to Live, where women in particular run poorly when a monster is after them. At this point, I want to talk about the plot structure, and I think I actually moved up here to this slide. Again, according to Carroll's philosophy of horror, there are two basic horror plots: the complex discovery and the overreacher plot. In the overreacher plot, Carroll defines this as containing a central character who is in search of forbidden knowledge, scientific, magical, or occult. This discovered knowledge is tested by an experiment or incantation of evil forces. Indeed, this fits the bill for both of these stories, with love and or sexual desire acting as the motivating factor. The horror romance elements work together here to strengthen each narrative's theme. Returning to the concept of sporagmos, this horrific metamorphosis is integral to the romantic relationships at the core of these stories. In Hellraiser, Frank's return, which is a sort of catabasis in reverse, as he emerges from hell and re-enters the earthly plane, is conceived via his brother Larry's spilled blood. What's more is this conception becomes a pact of sorts as Julia grabs Larry's injured hand. The blood drips from both of their hands onto the floorboards, giving life to Frank's remains. Soon after this, Frank is reborn in all of his gruesome glory. And eventually he and Julia are reunited, and he implores her not to look at him in this condition. He's half the man he used to be, or maybe actually a third of the man he used to be. And I think there's an interesting parallel here between Frank's appearance and Eurydice's. Eurydice is among the recently arrived shades, or umbrae. She is among spirits who are also described as bloodless or exsangues. And most relevant, the act of looking upon her leads to disaster. And once she's looked at, she dies again, stupefying Orpheus to the extent that he's compared to someone who has caught sight of a terrifying monster. Both Julia and Orpheus keep their eyes averted, at least for a while, and keep their pact to their beloved. As long as they don't gaze upon them, they can make their lovers whole again, quite literally in both cases. Although in Frank's case, this requires feasting on the flesh and blood of strange men. And so Julia obliges, enduring the horror of inviting these men back to her house and murdering them so that Frank can subsume their bodies. She blinds herself, literally wearing some dark sunglasses here, so she can perform this task. While Orpheus isn't obliged to kill, nevertheless, he must also endure terror in the form of a catabasis. It takes a literal trip to hell rather than a symbolic one. And once again, the horrific elements are not divorced from the romantic ones. Rather, they complement each other. Frank suggests that their bond is stronger now as a result of Julia's hunting. And what I think is the most important line of the movie, Frank states, "We belong to each other now, like love, only real," which is very necromantic. And this is what happens when you successfully bring your dead lover back to life, for better or worse. Orpheus, of course, is unsuccessful on his journey, and maybe that's not such a bad thing. The overreacher, the one who desires to gain knowledge to bring the dead back to life, ultimately will pay a steep price. In Hellraiser, Julia becomes another one of Frank's victims, and Frank is soon torn apart once again and sent back to hell, having finally been tracked down by the Cenobites. The Cenobites are kind of a neutral party here, kind of like Hades. They're very no-nonsense. When someone opens the puzzle box, which opens up this hell dimension, this guy Pinhead shows up, and he's just very matter-of-fact, like, you opened it and we came. Perhaps because of Orpheus's failure to resurrect Eurydice, rather than despite it, they ultimately have a happy ending. At the beginning of book 11, Ovid tells that Orpheus and Eurydice end up being reunited, they walk side by side. Many works of literature are not just one thing. Even though industries insist on putting things into one neat box, there are so many elements to literary works, and I think it's important to recognize that not merely that genres cross over, but that the crossing over, when done effectively, can strengthen a literary work's theme, particularly if the cross genres are diametrically opposed. Hollywood shouldn't be afraid to combine such disparate elements as horror and romance. When done deftly, you get things like this. Right on the left, a romance masquerading as horror, and on the right, horror masquerading as romance. Thank you.